Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Today we're going to be talking with somebody who creates content. As a matter of fact, this is somebody who helps us create the very content you're listening to right now. His name is Chris Bailey. He's a podcast producer, a videographer, and many other media-related things. Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
It feels so interesting to be on this side of the content, so to speak. I'm so used to being on the other side editing things, so it's very, very nice to be on this side of the microphone. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it is so awesome to have you. And I just have to start by saying thank you so much because you have to work so hard with me.
No, it's no trouble. I love what I do, and it's so incredible to be able to work on your show and so many others and being able to make things concise and wrap everything up to help it flow, but also to get all of these incredible discussions that you have, all these insanely talented and storied guests, being able to hear those first. I feel a little bit lucky on that. I will just say, with all the guests that I've been able to edit over. Steve, how long have we been working together now? I feel like it's been a little bit.
I think this is show 60.
Okay, so over a year. Yeah, I don't think there's been a single episode that I was just like, okay, that was a good show. Every single episode, I'm always like, wow, that was exactly what I needed to hear.
Well, you've been great, but you guys have worked together before the podcast came to fruition, right?
Yes, we first met when someone brought something, Chris, that you had written to my attention. I believe you were 14 years old at the time. Is that right?
Yes, either right at the tail end of being 13 or early 14.
And why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what you were dealing with at that time, and that'll set the stage for what I want to share.
Sure. So I have no family history of this condition, but I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 13 years old. The way that we found out was I essentially lost almost 15 pounds in 1 week, and I just felt incredibly bad, for lack of a better word. My mother took me to a doctor. The doctor did not walk into the room. He burst through and said, "You need to go to this hospital right now." He is a type 1 diabetic, and he is about to go into what is called diabetic ketoacidosis. We're rushed over there, and essentially it was a pretty big life-altering event, especially when you're 13. You're already going through puberty at that point. You've already got enough hormones in you to bring down an African elephant. And so you add on to it this life-changing autoimmune condition. I just felt so overwhelmed by it. I felt like I need to write about this. My mom definitely encouraged me. She was like, "You need to find some way to get this out." And I'm like, I guess I could write about it. And so that ended up leading to Crooked Road.
When I received what you'd written, I couldn't believe it because as a professional lyricist, I know how long it takes to hone that craft and to write something that's powerful and meaningful and original. And your writing was well beyond your years. And I understand hearing you talk about it, that part of that was that you were processing what you were going through. But the way you chose to talk about it, I just want to read a little bit of what you wrote. You wrote, "I feel like a mirror that's been shattered by a rock. How will I ever put the pieces back together? It's like I'm in an earthquake and the shaking just won't stop, and nothing I can do will make it better." And then later you wrote, "It's as if there's a race and there's no way I can win because I'm running with my shoelaces tied. Every time I get up, I get knocked back down. How will I ever reach the finish line?" Can certainly hear the frustration and feel the agony of that place for a young person. Can you say more about that?
Well, absolutely. I also have struggled for, I guess, pretty much about the same amount of time, maybe a little bit earlier, with both depression and anxiety. I feel like depression and anxiety are extremely commonplace in my generation, but those are the feelings that you walk through. And the mirror lyric in particular was actually how I experienced that moment in my mind. Sitting in that doctor's office when the doctor walked in and said, "It's type 1 diabetes," was literally, I almost could see myself in a third person
Mm.
and everything kind of shattered. It was like watching a mosaic kind of slowly fall apart. And once you've seen a mirror that's been shattered, that mirror was me. And you start wondering, there's so many pieces here. How am I even going to begin to try and put these back to where they were originally to even somewhat resemble who I was before that rock shattered it?
Mhm.
And so I was speaking not only to the diabetes itself, but to the mental aspect that comes with it. Because with a challenge like this, oftentimes I feel that that is when the enemy really likes to become the shark or the lion and just dig into us deeper, because that's how he can keep us knocked down. The diagnosis is what pushes you to the ground. The enemy is what tries to hold you to that ground that you've been knocked to. And so when it comes to the laces being tied, again, I suffered a lot of other things, just typical, I would say, teenage things at that time. But in my head, I just felt like every time I try to take a step, I'm falling right back down.
Mhm.
So what am I supposed to do at this point? Where am I supposed to go? But as you know in the song, there wasn't anything I alone could do. It was something that I had to turn over to the Lord.
Well, what I loved about it too is that you didn't solve the problem in your writing. I think so often people feel like they have to wrap everything up with a neat bow, in 3 minutes or whatever, but that's not how life works, and
No.
you're still living with this disease today. And so when you wrote, "If you love me, God, why did you let this happen? Are you in this place I could not have imagined? I'm crying out for peace and the patience that comes from you alone. Lord, give me faith to walk this crooked road." That's the only smidgen of hope in the entire lyric. Lord, give me faith, walk this crooked road.
We see all the time in scripture, we like to talk, especially in the Psalms and the Proverbs, we like to talk about the ones where God is being praised and everything is the land of milk and honey. But we know that there are valleys in life just as much as there are peaks. And there aren't those simple solutions where, oh, yes, everything was so terrible, but it got better and now I'm great and everything's great all of the time. That's not realistic. So it's important to be able to let those emotions out, because I think the worst thing that a person can do when they're going through any hardship, whether it's something in their family, something in their personal life, is to bottle that emotion up and say, I don't have time to feel this right now. That is easily the worst thing that a person can do, because I would know I've done that. And it does not, I've never had it end well where I'm like, I'll just push this sadness down below the surface and we'll come back to it later. It's so important that you address that, not only with yourself, but with the Lord. The Lord wants to hear us in all phases of our lives, in all emotions of our lives. So it's so important to let that out and ask, why did you let this happen?
This lyric and just hearing you talk about the song and part of your journey is just so honest and clean about the pain and those questions. Like you said, I think so often people are afraid to ask the really sticky questions, especially if you were brought up in the church, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't know about y'all, but I was taught you don't ask those questions, but even if inside you really are. But, I love that about this song. And I love that about you too. You're just very honest and forthcoming, I guess is the word. But could you just tell us, what would you say the greatest lesson, if you had to pick one, because I know there's multiple lessons, but if you could pick just one of the greatest lessons that God has taught you as he's walked you through dealing with type 1 diabetes, because a lot changes with a diagnosis like that. I mean, you have to be very mindful of taking care of your body and the healing process. And I think a lot of people who maybe don't have a front row seat to that particular disease, it is difficult to understand how earth shaking it can be.
I mean, the lesson overall that I think is the most important is it's through hardships that we become stronger and better people. The mindset that I always think of is the strongest swords are forged in the hottest fires. You can't grow if you don't have adversity. Now, am I saying that, oh, okay, I should seek out adversity? No. But obviously God knows everything that he has planned out for our lives. And everyone will have adversity at some point in their life, but don't be discouraged by that because it does get better. It always does. It may not seem like it at the time. Believe me, there was about a year-long period after my diagnosis where I was in the valley. We're really deep in the valley, but I have now come to view my type 1 diabetes as one of the biggest blessings in my life. And I know that may seem perplexing, but it's given me the opportunity to help so many other people. I've had at least 5 or 6 people in my own personal life that I've gotten to talk to who were also diagnosed with diabetes. And the number one thing, whether it's diabetes or any other autoimmune condition or a cancer diagnosis, anything to that effect, being able to speak with somebody else who is also walking through that, it's invaluable. Being able to just, first of all, sit down with someone who they just got the diagnosis. They're trying to figure out how to prick their finger to check their blood sugar for the first time. Being able to just sit there and be like, hey, I get it. It's all going to be all right. That's invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's just that base on the other side of the ocean, right? Because it feels like an ocean when you get that diagnosis and you're like, every day my life is completely different now.
Mm-hmm.
You hear people who are afraid of needle pokes all the time. I work in the medical field part-time, so it's like a lot of people don't like that. But for the diabetic, this is a regular part of your life. And for a kid, oh my goodness, so much about your life changes. So it helps to have that person that says, you will survive.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you for being a face of survival, but also a face that has come to thrive in the middle of such things.
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's not just survival. It's being able to thrive with it. There are so many incredible things that I've been able to do. And you don't ever let your condition define who you are as a person. That's the most important thing. And I feel like that can apply to any hardship that a person is going through, whether it's medical or relational or whatever it might be. I just want people to know that your past circumstances don't dictate future results, and your conditions or experiences that were horribly negative, they don't have to define who you are.
Amen. Amen. Well said. So, Chris, what is the first thing you would tell a young person receiving this kind of diagnosis?
It gets better. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get choked up there, but it does. It will get better. And I want to make it 2 things. There are so many people. You have a community. You have people here for you that are going to help come alongside you and walk through you with this. And I think that is something that is the most important thing. It's hysterical to me when I listen to Crooked Road, because now that I'm an adult, I think, shoot, I wish I had said this too in the song, or why didn't I also talk about this? And I realize how well the message is of the song. And I'm like, it didn't need to have anything added. But now that I'm, in my 20s, I'm like, no, wait, but I wanted to talk about the importance of community. And I wanted to talk about how it gets better. It's like, I could probably write several albums on just.
That's a different song, Chris. Yeah.
Yes, I know, but that's not how my brain works. My brain's like, no. We don't need 2 songs. It'll be a 30-minute song and we'll just cram everything together. But community is such an important facet of that. And the Lord has made us social creatures. We were not meant to live in isolation, but where the enemy gets us the most is by isolating, to make you feel like, hey, you are the only person that has ever lived on this little blue marble that has ever gone through what you're going through right now. No one else has.
I think that's true with every issue that Music for the Soul has dealt with. The common themes are that people think that they're alone, that I'm the worst person who ever lived, I'm the guiltiest, I'm the most shameful, whatever it is. Everybody thinks that they're alone.
Yeah.
And so that isolation piece is huge. And Christianity can't be done in a vacuum. You have to have community. We have to be able to love one another through these kinds of things.
Of course. We have to be able to support each other in the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. It's so much easier too. I'm not saying it makes it easy in general, but it does become so much easier when we have people to walk with through these hardships. And to also understand that so many times we like to blame ourselves for a lot of hardships that we face. And it's so important to have somebody else pull us out of that thought process and say, it's not your fault. It's so important to hear that sometimes, because it could be so easy to blame ourselves, even for things like type 1 diabetes. You'd be surprised how many nights where I was like, could I have done something different? Because right before I got diabetes, I had mononucleosis that I got because I was too lazy to go get my own drink. My friend had mono. He was over for a spend the night, and I just drank out of his drink. And I said, what's the worst that could happen? Well, the worst that could happen was mono. And then 6 months later, diabetes, and those might have been possibly related to each other. And just like that, I remember I sat awake at night. I was just like, why did you do that? Like, it's all, if I hadn't done that, healthy. And you know how your mind could just run down the rabbit holes of what if. Having somebody else in there just to talk to, just to vent about that, to pull you back. Because the main thing that you never want to have happen is what I like to call the record player. And I know, thankfully, vinyl's making a comeback, so people under my age will actually know what the heck records are. But when you have that needle get stuck on the record, it just keeps playing the same part over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
You need somebody else to come over, pick up the arm, and set it back on track for that story. Sometimes we can't do that on our own.
Yeah, I think that's true of even when you've made bad decisions. And it is, we do make bad choices, and then there's an aftermath from those choices. But again, that's exactly what our God does, is he picks up the needle off the record and he says, no, I paid for that. You don't have to replay that in your life another time.
Yes.
You get to sing a new song and have a new start and a new day. So, it's just so, and this song, it's really applicable to so many things. So I got to ask, how is your health doing today?
Phenomenal. I currently have, there's basically a number that we measure called A1C, and that monitors how your blood sugars have been over the course of 3 months. Because random fun science fact, blood is very sticky, and so sugar likes to stick to it. And so we can check that and figure out, okay, approximately over 3 months, how much sugar's been in your blood, for lack of a better term. I have an A1C that is very close. It's not quite there yet, but very close to that of a non-diabetic. I have no long-term complications. Even my endocrinologist is a little bit shocked that I have no neuropathy. I have no eye issues. And that I give credit not only to God, but to the advancements in technology, the management stuff with things like insulin pumps. The management has gotten so much easier that now, diabetes to me is no different than waking up in the morning and brushing my teeth. It's just kind of become a part of my day. But in the beginning, I was like, I don't want to have to give myself insulin. I don't want to have to. But now I kind of would view that as, I don't want to brush my teeth. It's like, okay, well, you need to brush your teeth. I mean, otherwise you're going to knock people over the second you open your door.
Thank goodness for advancements, right?
Absolutely.
Big changes.
Well, I feel like maybe it'd be nice to play a little bit of the song for people before we shift gears here. So here's a little bit of Crooked Road.
This is my life. And if you love me, God, why did you let this happen? Are you in this place? I could not have imagined. I'm crying out for peace and the patience that comes from you alone. Lord, give me faith to walk this crooked road.
Okay, we're going to change gears a bit here and talk about how God reconnected us for a completely different reason. I was talking with one of our board members, Shelley, about the fact that we were getting ready to do a podcast, really felt like we were being called to that, and, didn't know who to reach out to, who I was going to work with for that. And she said, well, Chris Bailey is a podcast producer now. And I said, really? And which my immediate thought was, that song must have been a long time ago, because I know he was not an adult then. And I think that's a good example for our listeners of how a song that is roughly almost 15 years old now still has such power if you've never heard it before. Songs have life.
Yes.
And no matter how old a song is, if you've never heard it before, for the moment you hear it for the first time, it's brand new for you. So, Chris, it was just great to find out that you were doing podcast work.
Oh my goodness. And again, thank you, because we could not do this without you. If our audience could only hear what this sounds like apart from your gift, I don't think we'd have anybody.
Well, I'll tell you, I can give them this clue. There's a lot more and there's a lot of you know
like
Well, it makes sense though, because that's how we talk. You knows, likes, all of those things. Sometimes, and I feel like I do this very frequently, we start a sentence without having an end to it, and we're kind of like, oh, my brain will figure that out as we're going along.
How am I going to fly this plane and then land it?
I gotta land this baby.
I just wanted to
a landing.
just wanted to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you. And your brain's like, wait, we didn't get to the ending part. So and so they're placeholders. They give your brain a chance to catch up with your mouth, as I like to call it. So
wow.
Yes.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I got to know, how did you get into this line of work? Bless you.
Oh, yeah. Well, funnily enough, it was in college. I had a family friend that was working with a nonprofit that worked to help couples that were going through sexual brokenness, pornography addiction, and infidelity. And they were trying to dip their feet into podcasting. And I'll just say on the side, I was already editing my own content while I was at Sanford because I was a journalism major. So I was already doing video and audio editing, not only for school projects, but personal projects, personal passions that I had. And I'm like, I kind of like this editing thing. It's nice being able to, I almost compare myself to a sushi chef where they take like the whole fish and then they hit it a bunch of times with the knife, cut out some of the parts that don't need to be in there, and then all this perfect sushi plops down on the plate. I'm not saying I'm perfect, far from it, but that's the image I have in my mind. I just take an unedited audio clip, throw it up in the air, slice, and then it falls into place, and it makes the story have such a greater impact because you get right to the parts that are the most important. And one of the first episodes I got to edit for that nonprofit was with Dan Allender out of Seattle, Washington. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but oh my goodness, listening to that man speak, that was what I'm like, I want to hear more like this, where guests like this come in and share their stories and share their tidbits of wisdom, and being able to edit that so when people listen, you can get right to that point. You don't have to because I love people that do unedited podcasts. I have nothing wrong with them. But if they go on a tangent for a little too long, or if they have too many ums or uhs, I feel like it can detract from certain parts of the discussion. And I'm no different. As I said before, I could talk to a brick wall for 3 hours. So it's just nice to be able to get directly to what is the heart of the discussion. And so there's a lot of passion with that.
I'm just always amazed because naturally when we finish recording, I'll often go back and listen to something to see how I feel about it. And I'll think, well, that's pretty good. And then I get back the piece after you've worked on it, and it just flows so much better. And it feels like, well, what I just did feels like there's none of that.
Well, I've just done it long enough now that I literally can look at a audio file. So basically, if you're curious about this, you can Google what an audio file looks like. But it looks like a bunch of rolling hills because you have parts where people are softer and you have parts where people are louder. I have done so much editing at this point that I can identify an just on visual alone. And that's not just for you guys. Most uhs look exactly the same. Most you knows look exactly the same.
And I beg your pardon. I have very unique you knows.
Yes, of course. My apologies. But
I would beg to differ.
Okay, so that one I can already tell you it'll be a bit of a flat line, and then it'll go up a bit on the Like I've done this for so long. I know too how conversation should flow. Some people, they think you've got to cut it and you've got to take the next clip and put it right smack dab up against the last one. But then you get podcasts where it sounds like the person's never taking a breath.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, and so there I was, and I was doing this, and then I was doing this. So then I went over here, and you're like, okay, no, you've got to add the pauses in as well, because there's the cadence of natural conversation. You want to retain that.
That's interesting, Chris, because as a vocal producer for recordings and for songs, I will pour over a sound file and I'll think, we need a breath here. The breath that the singer actually took doesn't feel natural. That breath distracts my attention. I need one that's smoother or longer or softer or louder.
Mm-hmm.
People would be amazed at how much of a difference things that don't seem like they should matter can make.
Yeah.
Or taking a vocal and just scooching it a nanosecond earlier or a nanosecond later can make it come alive. We just feel things differently based on that rhythm and pacing. And so that's ultimately what you're creating, is that rhythm and pacing that makes it feel more interesting, more exciting, more compelling.
It's basically, again, just helping to bring out the fullness of the discussion itself. Because the other thing that I know some people think, obviously we live in a world where a lot of things are edited to be deceitful, especially with the invention of a little app called Photoshop. I know we've had many, many different discussions on the internet in general, just like, is that real or did that get Photoshopped? Does that person's figure really look like that? Was that Photoshop? How good does that car look? Yeah, can you trust it? That's not the kind of editing that I do. All I do is I take the story and the discussion that a person is having, and I trim away a bit of the fat, and I trim it up a bit to help it flow a bit better. But I never edit something with the intention of manipulating the discussion that is going on. And that's an important thing to have in this industry. You want to retain all of the discussion that you are working through, whether it's a song or a podcast or a video project, whatever that may be. The most important thing, the reason you're doing the editing in the first place, is to maintain and help that story shine through as brightly as it can.
Well, you do a great job of that. Certainly.
Thank you.
Now, the word I hear there as you're speaking is integrity. The integrity of the conversation or whatever the content is that you're sharing.
Absolutely.
For those out there who are listening and maybe thinking about starting their own podcast, what would you say are the most important elements of a good show?
Content first and foremost. Just, you don't have to have a crazy, wacky idea, because I know a lot of people will be like, if you want to start a podcast, you got to have a hook. I mean, you don't, not really. I think if you have good content, something that you feel has a uniqueness to it because of who you are and what you're talking about, that's the most important thing off the bat. And you have to enjoy it. You have to start a podcast because you have stories that you want to tell about something. I will tell you right now, it's very difficult to start a podcast with the goal of making oodles and oodles of money and still be doing it 6 months later, because it's just not realistic. You have to have
waiting
passion.
for our first oodle.
Well, we're getting there. It takes time. These things
I take an ood.
Yeah.
I don't need the
We did
just
an
an ood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did.
or an ooh. I don't even need the D. Ooh.
I'm just imagining, like, I've got both an image of the Grinch and Willy Wonka in my head with this discussion. But yeah, the content is first and foremost. The other thing that I will say is it does pay to invest in good audio equipment. I've heard so many podcasts where, unfortunately, it sounds like the person is talking into what can only be described as a modified potato. Well, so hi, Jim, how was this thing last week? And you're like, oh, man, this is pleasant to listen to. I didn't need my right eardrum anyway. You have to be able to, you don't have to go over the top with your equipment, but investing a bit more is definitely beneficial, because your voice is the key to a podcast and you want that voice to sound as good as possible. But the other thing that I would say is don't be too perfectionistic, like starting out. Is that a word? We're going to make that a word. But there are so many things that can be done in post-production. For example, I probably just had a bit of a verbal slip up there that you will never hear. And there are things that can be done to modify things after you hit stop recording. So you don't have to put too much pressure. So many people get nervous when they have guests on too, especially if they're bigger name guests or collaborations with bigger content creators. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. Well, unless you are live streaming it to YouTube or another service, it can be edited. You can have, did you have an embarrassing slip up? We can take that out. Did you go on for 10 minutes about your grandchild's new dog that they just got? Like, we can take that out too.
There never happens on the Music versus Soul.
No,
podcast.
No, not at all.
I never, ever, ever have a slip up. No.
What? But again,
and we all laugh hysterically because we all know that's not true.
Well, I mean, it's important to recognize that we will have slip ups. It's the sort of thing that we're all human at the end of the day. I mean, the editing of the podcast, the thing that I also try to retain is that human nature. Mm-hmm. I don't want you guys to sound like perfectly speaking robots. If I wanted to do that nowadays, I could just throw it in AI and it would perfectly spit it back. Having that.
Speaking of that, it is time for us to. No, I'm just
oh my gosh, they're already here.
We could go on and on and on, but
speak from the heart. It's the last thing that I would say is just speak from the heart on whatever it is you want to talk about. If you want to talk about sports, speak from the heart on it. If you want to share a story about your spiritual life or what you've walked through, speak from the heart. Mm-hmm. Genuine people enjoy interacting with genuine people. And I think that's what the world needs right now is more people who are willing to be genuine and empathetic.
Well, Chris, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and hire you to be a podcast editor or a videographer or a content creator or whichever of your gifts they want to take advantage of, how would they find you?
I do have a website. It is CSB Production, and that'll be down in the show notes. But it's funny, my company name is CSB Productions. I went to go register that domain, and it was already registered, and they wanted $60,000 for it. I was like, let me see if I take the S off the end of Productions. Oh, that's available. Register. But they can contact me there. We have an email list. We do pretty much anything to do with audio and video. We've been doing this now for, almost a decade, officially under the business name for 7 years. You can see all the people we've worked with because I don't really like to toot my own horn, but on the website I do. If you're curious who we've worked with, they're all on the website. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I hear that all the time from my parents. They're like, yeah, you worked with this person. You need to put that up on your website. And I'm kind of just like begrudgingly, yeah, I'll go do that.
Well, it's a resume. People have to know. It's just like if you were, in any other job, it's a resume.
I just don't like to brag. Yeah.
Well, we will brag you up any time of day because we know what these podcasts sound like before you get to them. So somebody said, do you ever listen to your podcast? I go, yeah, because it never turns out exactly like the conversation, which is awesome. So again, thank you for being with us today. And dear listeners, if you enjoyed the discussion today, please share it with a friend and give us a positive review on iTunes.
And please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog, including Crooked Road. Read our lyrics, our healing music guide, our blog posts, and much more. Thank you for listening. God bless.
Feeling different from everybody else. How I wish for just one day I could be normal. But there is no escaping and no cure to make me well. And every single day is such a struggle. I cannot run, I cannot hide. What can I do? This is my life. And if you love me, God, why did you let this happen? Are you in this place? I could not have imagined. I'm crying out for peace and the patience that comes from you alone. Lord, give me faith to walk this crooked road. Oh. I feel like a ever put the pieces back together. It's like I'm in an earthquake and the shaking just won't stop. And nothing I can do will make it better. So much pain, such a crime. It's just not fair, it's just not right. And if you love me, God, why did you let this happen? Are you in this place? I could not have imagined. I'm crying out for peace and the patience that comes from you alone. Oh Lord, give me faith to walk this crooked road. Whoa. It's as if there is a race and there's no way I can win, 'cause I'm running with my shoelaces tied. Every time I get up, I get knocked back down. How will I ever reach the finish line? Sometimes it feels like you're not there. Lord, do you see? Lord, do you care? And if you love me, God, why did you let this happen? Are you in this place? I could not have imagined. I'm crying out for peace and the patience that comes from you alone. Oh Lord, give me faith to walk this crooked road. Please give me faith to walk this crooked road.